Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Wings Podcast. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri. On today's show, we will meet Amey Gokarn, an independent design professional living in London for almost a decade and a half. Coming from a Marathi school, he decided to study graphic design from University of Arts London. He moved to the UK in 2008 in the midst of a global financial crash and has worked in big advertising agencies, eventually making a move to freelance work in user interface design. An avid cyclist with a clear aversion for motorcars, Amey has taken part in many cycling adventures across the UK, as well as the French Alps and the Spanish Sierra Nevada mountains. Analog photography, as practiced in the early 20th century, is his newfound hobby to cope with the wet and cold British winters. Welcome, Amey, to this episode of Wings Podcast.
Thank you.
It's good we're having a conversation in the India time zone. Though you are living and based out of UK, you are on your vacation in India, so I'm glad to catch up with you right here. So Amey, you moved to the UK in 2008, is that right?
Yes, that is right, yeah.
And we are in 2022 right now. So why don't we begin our conversation by having a brief glimpse of Amey Gokarn as he was in 2008, as he is in 2022, and all the stuff that happened in between.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. Yes, Milind, thank you for having me on the podcast. And yeah, I would love to chat about that. When I went to UK, I generally don't use UK. I say London because I have never lived anywhere outside London in UK. And London is not UK and UK is not London. I moved to London in 2008. I was a student, so I finished my bachelor's in India, and then I moved here to do a degree in graphic design. It was almost like a lateral move because I studied fine arts in India and I wanted to kind of change my education and gear up towards what I wanted to work in for, I guess, the rest of my life. So I decided to study graphic design. I went to a university called Camberwell College of Arts. It's a very old art school in Southeast London. I moved there in 2008, September, I think. That was their normal intake for the year. If you ask me what I was like back then, I would say I was just like a wide-eyed, young, extremely kind of excited for whatever there was to offer student back then. Now, because I'm a little older, I look at the wider context of where I am and what's happening around me and in the world. I didn't think about that like that then. But if you retrospectively want to see what it was like, I arrived in the UK when the Labour Party government was about to be outvoted by the Conservative Party. So I lived under Labour Party for 6 months. We were also in the middle of a global financial crash.
Yes.
And there I was, just being a student, kind of clueless about any of these things in the world, and just had this one focus of learning as much as as much as I could. And I was very, very naive, young. I started the university. So one of the things that we did back then, this was almost pre-social media. There was nothing really back then in 2008. Was I kind of refused to stay in the student halls, which the university offers you. And it's like an easy thing to do. You can pre-book them before you arrive to the UK, and it's easier. If you're a student, you don't have to worry about anything. You arrive in the Heathrow airport and they take you straight to student halls. But because I wanted to look at it like an adventure, I was like, yeah, no, I want to live privately. I want to live away from the university halls. So I got a group of 5 or 6 of us together, and we basically tried to figure out where we can live. So I think I was the one who found this place in this area called Peckham in London, and figured out who the landlord was, called him, I mean, people were replying on emails, but it was still not as much of a communication tool as it is now. It was not as easy. There were no websites of listings and stuff like that as such. There were like old school websites, classified websites like OLX in India. There was a Gumtree. It's still there. That's where I found this property. And I mean, even when I found first few properties, they turned out to be scams. So I called them and they're like, no, you should send us a deposit. Then I asked someone who lived in UK and they said, you should never send a deposit. You should always go there and look and then pay the money. So first, I think maybe 3 were scams. And then this fourth one I called the guy, I got everything sorted. And then we arrived there.
Did you lose money in those first 2-3 transactions?
No. I was very stern about the money, as in I told the landlord that I will pay only when we get there.
Yeah.
And I think one of my friend arrived the day before I did, and he was the first person to be there. It's just because we couldn't get the same tickets on the flight or something. And he messaged me saying, yeah, it's all fine. It's all good. And that was a huge sigh of relief for me as well. And then I arrived the next day, and I guess then that's when the adventure began. I mean, I would even say the adventure began before that, but that's when the London adventure began. And it's a city I have lived in for, I'm not good at maths, it's from 2008 to 2022. And it's a city that I still love. I would go even beyond that. I would say it's a city that I'm in love with. I still go on the same road. I cycle everywhere. So I even when sometimes late at night when I'm coming back home from pub, and I cross London Bridge and I just look around and I'm like, this is amazing. Like even after so many years, I feel the same excitement to be in that city. And few years down the line, I asked myself this: that why am I so attracted to this city? And I think at the core of it, I'm a city boy. I was born and brought up in Pune, and I have always lived in cities. I lived in Mumbai for a year and a half, almost 2 years. For first few months, I hated it. Being from Pune, everyone hates Mumbai in the first few months. But after that, it just became a drug that I was kind of dependent on. And I loved it. I loved it after few months. I would say 6 months. I loved it, and I think that's where the fundamental of me loving London is. It's just something. It's cities that I love.
So in 2022, if I sorry to interrupt there, but then we will go through that magical love affair that you've had with the city of London. But where are you now? What is it that Amey Gokarn does in 2022?
So I don't think I work that remotely different to what I did study or what I worked even back then, because I got jobs straight out of university. And the kind of work that I did then and the kind of work that I do now, maybe the tools have changed and the media has changed, but the fundamentally what I do is exactly the same. So profession wise, I still design things. Back then I used to design for display advertising, that ads that you see in your emails, ads that you see on your websites and stuff. And now I design apps. So design has always remained at the core of it. In terms of me as a person, honestly, I don't think there's a big change in me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still, as I said, I'm still in love with that city as much as I was on the first day. I still right now I'm in India on holiday for like more than a month now. And I wouldn't say I'm homesick, but I'm looking forward to having that first bike ride to the central London and have a pint with my friends, because it's just,
So if
go ahead. Sorry.
So if the city of London were to be like a girlfriend to you, and if you were having or enjoying a glass of beer with your girlfriend, what kind of conversation that would happen between you and this girlfriend of yours called the city of London?
I guess like a nature of conversation that you would have with an old friend, which begins with nostalgia, and then it goes to now, and then it's future. So if it was nostalgia, I would be like, okay, I came here in the city long time ago as a student. My first job in London was a dishwasher in a restaurant. It's not something like socioeconomically, it's not something I needed to do, but I wanted to do it. I wanted to see what it's like. I wanted to see, because this restaurant was in a very highly dense touristy and central London area called Covent Garden. And it
Mhm.
was in the Apple Market of Covent Garden, which is a very, very old building. I'm not sure when it was built, but it was built many, many years ago. You can see that. I was fascinated by that building back then as well, even before I started working at this restaurant. And I just wanted to see what it was like. It was a thrilling experience. I got to do things and see things that I could have never done if I stayed in this very secure upper middle class socioeconomic bubble in India. I wanted to kind of get away from it and see what it was like. Uh, Funnily enough, the job that there was given to me, well, not given to me, referred to me by the person who was living in the house that we moved in, and he
Mhm.
moved out of the house and he moved out of the country, and he was like, there's this student I know, would you like to work in this restaurant? And I was like, yeah, fine, why not?
Mhm.
Because when you're a student, you don't think long term or anything like that. I was like, yeah, I mean, that will be my beer money, right? Which is what I did with it pretty much. I
Yeah.
drank a lot of beer with it. It was fun. And the best part of that also, again, was so there's like a parallel story to this, which is when I arrived in London, I wanted to go to the central and see things, right? So I was like, okay, let's take the tube or the bus, whatever. I think I took the bus first time, number 12, from Peckham to Oxford Street, and the ticket back then maybe was like £2 or something. And early when you arrive, you always convert things into Indian rupees. You're like,
Sure.
fuck, this is 200 rupees or something. And then, and I spent like an hour and a half in that bus. And I was really kind of frustrated with the whole thing, because like it's like 200 rupees and I'm in this bus for 2 hours and I'm still not there yet. And the distance is what, like 12 kilometers? No, less than that, like 6, 7 kilometers from Peckham. So I went home that day and I was like, I need to buy a bike. And I bought like a really cheap bike on Amazon. Actually, Amazon was still a thing back then as well. Really cheap bike. And it arrived in like maybe 3 or 4 days time. And since then, I basically stopped taking public transport in that. Basically, 2008 October onwards, I was not a regular public transport user. I have never had a pass on my Oyster card.
Oh,
Whenever I take public transport is an exception. It's never.
wow.
It's if I'm really tired or if the weather is really 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 bad. That's when I take public transport. Otherwise, there's literally, I see no point, because I don't look at rain or sun or anything like that as a constraint to ride a bicycle, especially in that city. So I used to cycle to this job in Covent Garden, and I most of the days I used to do the last shift. So the restaurant kitchen closes at 11, and then you have to do the garbage as well. So you do the dishwashing, you finish the dishwashing by maybe 11:15. Then you do the garbage. Then you close everything. I don't know what happens in Indian kitchens. I've never worked there, but you have to clean all the kitchen. So my job role was porter. There were two porters for that restaurant. It wasn't a big restaurant. The kitchen maybe was like 30 square feet, like tiny, tiny kitchen. So the two porters, me and this other guy, we used to clean the kitchen, take the garbage out. And then I used to cycle home, which was at about 12:30 sometimes. And I think that's what got me hooked to the city,
Hmm.
being solo on a bicycle, cycling through this amazing city. And I think that was my draw to it. And it happened in the first month of being there. So I was kind of straight into the deep end of this love affair with that city.
But then those must
Yeah,
be cold and probably wet nights too, right?
yeah, they were back then. I think I was a bit more precious about things like these. I was a bit more comfortable, as I said, from this very protected upper middle class socioeconomic bubble. You sometimes ask yourself, like, why am I doing this kind of a thing? They were cold, they were uncomfortable, but I think that kind of got me into thinking that, I mean, that's how I pushed myself into making cycling as an endurance sport, which I practice as a hobby, where I do like really sometimes the weather is really horrible and you still have to ride. But it's a hobby. It's not like I have to ride it. It's a privileged thing that I do. But the times like those when I was working at this restaurant, I had to, like, there was no other way to do it, because if I started spending my money on oyster pass back then I would have had nothing. I was working on minimum wage,
Of course.
hourly wage, and they had a lot of demand as well, because it's like a central London restaurant. So there was a lot of labor that they could attract easily. So they could have easily gotten rid of me. And I never used to get as much shifts as I wanted to. So when you're a student in UK, you're allowed to do only 20 hours per week. I used to get between 15 and 16 hours at minimum wage in 2008. That wasn't a lot of money, but that was a lot of money for a student.
Sure. So, we'll come back to your love for cycling, because I know today it's much more than simply taking you from A to B. But before we go there, I mean, here you are, like many young aspiring Indian students who, obviously prefer the US first, and obviously UK and Canada and Australia and a couple of other destinations. 2008, the world was a very different world. You would have had a certain idea of the kind of world that you would be getting into in the UK, rather London, because that's where you have been all along. So you are a London boy for almost almost a decade and a half now. And when you look at UK or London then, and UK and London now, which is post Brexit, with whatever challenges that the country has, what do you say to yourself?
Yeah, it's a question that gets asked to me by myself every day, pretty much, especially now. Now, because I'm older, I guess a little bit more wiser. And I now have a child. So I think about future a bit more than what I used to before having a child. Yeah, it's a strange one, right? Because when I moved here, I asked the same questions to someone who had lived in the UK for a long time, and I wanted to know what their opinions were back then. Two things I kind of understood about people, not people, I guess situations, was that when people moved, I spoke to maybe 2 or 3 people who have lived here a longer time. One of them moved in the early 90s. The other one had moved in like 70s, like long time ago. And what I got from them is that the contemporary thinking was not there, in that sense that when they left India, that was their idea of India that they have taken with them. And even though they have lived in this foreign country for 10, 15, 20 years, they think about India what it was when they left it, which is for the guy who moved in early 90s. He thinks about India in its 90s sense, in the early 90s sense. I wouldn't say, because of the invention of internet these days, I wouldn't say that they are not aware about the news of India. Like, even everyone is aware of news everywhere these days because there is internet. But just like, I would say, be the culture and what people think, those sort of things, and the socioeconomics, people kind of sometimes freeze that. It didn't happen to me a lot, because I have been coming back home at least for a month every year. Except for COVID, 2 years, I've been there every year. I have friends here. I speak with them regularly, and I don't speak with them in sort of like nostalgic terms, like those were the days we were friends back then and so on. I talk to them about what do you think about India now? What has changed in the last 5 years? What do you think about the current political situations? What do you think about the financial situation? Is there job security? Those sort of kind of basic questions that you would, I mean, maybe not basic questions, but that's the sort of conversations I have with people back home. So I have a good sense of that. And I would say, questioning myself, and so I have friends who have born and brought up in UK, or some of them moved from, let's say, Europe or America to UK. And I say the same thing to them. Like, I voluntarily chose this country, whereas you didn't have a choice. You're born here, and I chose a country that has been in perpetual crisis. So I came to the UK in 2008 financial crisis. Then it was Brexit, and now I mean, you name it, the Ukraine war. Today, on I'm reading the news, the pound has slipped massively because of the mini budget that UK had on Friday. So it's a constant state of crisis that we have lived in. So I do ask myself these questions, but then I kind of go back and think how privileged I am to be here in this beautiful city. And again, I think now every generation would think like that. Every generation would think that the generation before them had it easier. So I think I have become that kind of old guyish way where I think that maybe if I had come here 20 years ago, I would have been a little better off than what I'm right now. But I think it's all relative. And it's the sort of thing that I try not to overthink myself. And whenever I whenever people, like even like last week, someone asked me, what is UK like? A very young student, 19-year-old student asked me, what is UK like? And I would like to move there. And I never show my skepticism as much as I've just said. I always say that, I mean, it's the most exciting place in the world, which it is for me. I mean, London is.
Of course, I mean, yes, I mean, a lot has changed, a lot is changing. The pace of change is phenomenal just about everywhere, every part of the world, Amey. But living in the UK for such a long period, an Indian at heart, Indian as such, having now your family, your girl, I think is what, 2-3 years old?
Yeah, 3 years old.
3 years old. You have a family, and you would be, I guess, a permanent resident of UK soon. Now, when you look at India of today, what do you see?
I'm very I'm going to put a personal lens on this. I'm quite neutral in a sense that I feel like I have no right to judge India anymore. It's not my country. I don't pay tax there. I don't really vote in the elections there, so I don't have a right to judge India. But I have this like a willful ignorant, comfortable position of not judging India, but just seeing it from the outside. And I think India is going through the same cycles as the West right now. Politically, economically, the domino effect has always been going on India, but I think in the recent times it is much more so than it was in the past. So if something happens in the West, it kind of happens in India in next 6 months. I'm talking politically, maybe even less so. Sometimes it can go the other way around as well. Something might happen in India before it happens in the West. So I'm not, the distances are much less now, in sort of like economic and political sense. Like even if you look at the economical news now, India is a bigger and better economy, growing economy than UK. So I live in a country with a colonial hangover. So our problems are very different to the problems of India. Although they are sometimes similar, we also have inequality, and India also has inequality. It's a totally different lens on it. So fundamentally, I have no right to judge India, or I have no right to even. I mean, I still call it my country. I still have Indian passport, but almost not.
So today afternoon, I was watching BBC, and I kind of picked up these two news items, and these two new items, in the way the report was presented, were claimed to be historic. One, as you said a little while ago, the British pound hitting its all-time low against the US dollar, almost coming at par, but for 1.03, 05, 08 is wherever it closed today, compared to 2.65 when the pound was first floated against the US dollar in 1972. Roughly, if you do a quick math, it's roughly 60 to 70% drop over this period. That was one piece of news. That's how it was. The narrative was framed as one big change that has happened in Europe, in UK, and two, for the first time since Mussolini, a far-right party might be leading and running the government of Italy. So
Yes.
I know you are a well-aware, well-read person on socio-political economic issue, and you are right there in the middle of the world. And I use that term because I was reading somewhere why the Middle East was called Middle East, because it was east to the middle, where UK was supposed to be in the middle of the world. I don't know whether it is true or trivia, but sitting there, you are in the thick of action and you look at the world around you, whether it is in the US, Europe, Asia, China. What kind of world do you see emerging in the near future? I mean, again, trying to be value neutral here. Again,
Yeah, of course.
unless you have positions, you can, and if you're free to share, most welcome. But then, as a young Indian, having established a firm footing for yourself in the UK, what kind of world do you see globally?
I think so. As the generations go past, every generation has some abilities, some sort of like special thing that every generation brings in. I think the millennials, which is what I'm a millennial, is we live in a perpetual crisis. So when you say pound slipping against dollar first time since 1972, like 60-70%, and the far right being elected in Italy, I think us millennials have thick skin towards the crises that are happening around us, and we have no other way. We have no other way to handle them. We have no other way to escape. Not that I'm being very empathetic to myself or anything like that. I think the generation after us, the Gen Zers, will be even better than us with these sort of things. But the way I see it is that it's a crisis of many, since since we have. I mean, and that goes across borders. I don't think Indian millennials don't face crisis. All millennials live in a perpetual crisis state. And second is, I comfort myself by saying we are part of a political cycle which will, to go to your second question about far right being elected in Italy, it's a political cycle that needs to take place, and I think we are at that point of a political cycle where it's going on the other direction, and soon, well, maybe in a decade, maybe less than that, the page will turn. So those are the two ways I kind of look at it.
But then what I hear from you then is, in the broader terms, you have framed yourself as a part of the millennial generation, not necessarily millennials from India, but millennials from any part of the world, where what I hear you saying is, because you and your cohort seem to be living in a perpetual crisis, and that seems to be an accepted way of life. Would it be then fair to say that rather than forming views and judgments and taking positions, whether you like this crisis or don't like this crisis, the only option then seems to be is to figure out ways to react and respond?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've done personally in my life is that I used to be an employee. I worked for a lot big agencies and stuff like that in the UK, but because the wage growth is stagnated and the wage to expense gap is getting bigger and bigger, the usual like money situations, right? I was like, if we live in an unstable world, why chase for stability in personal or professional life? I would say professional rather than personal. Why chase stability in professional life? So in 2015, I kind of was kind of gifted this. I was made redundant from the job that I was working for, and that was my first kind of professional shock. I was never made redundant before. And just like a divorce or something, you start blaming yourself. Like, did I do something wrong? But then you realize it was not you, it was always them, and they couldn't run a business. So they had to liquidate and let everyone go and so on and so forth. I took good 6 months off. Then I cycled a lot. I was in the best shape of my life, and it was also summer here, so it was amazing. And then I started freelancing. And the nature of freelance has always been like you get a contract for, sometimes it can be 3 days, sometimes it can be 2 years. So I worked in a contract which was for 2 years, and I worked in a contract which was for 3 days. And I still am a freelancer. So right now I'm between jobs. That's why I'm on holiday, but I'm between jobs. So I'm changing my contract from what I was working for. I was working for a big consultancy, and now I'll be working for a big supermarket brand in UK called Tesco, and that is only for 6 months. So I don't know what happens after 6 months. So I started living my life one contract at a time, or maybe 6 months at a time. So there's no point chasing stability in unstable times in your profession, because then your personal growth and your, I guess, wealth stagnates, because then you're caught in this weird capitalistic cycle of low wage growth and just reaching your professional ceilings of learning in a job. The more I change jobs, the more I learn, the more I meet different people, and the more skills I get. Forget about my day-to-day stuff, which is, let's say I'm a designer, I design, but it also is down to people handling. It is also down to how to work in challenging situations in different countries as well, because I worked my last job, I was working with designers who were based in Middle East, and some were based in Estonia, in I guess Eastern-ish Europe, and that. So now I come off that, and I now work with a predominantly British team with engineers who are going to be working in India, because Tesco has a big engineering office in India. So that just like completely changes the dynamic. So if I keep working in one job for one company for a long time, I will never be able to learn that. So I'm going to look at instability as a measure to kind of grow myself.
So Amey, you very beautifully articulated your own reality as a millennial, living in a world where nothing seems to be remaining static or stable beyond a short period of time. And then you've kind of learned to react and respond to that in terms of the way you've designed your own career at this point in time as a freelancer, and taking assignments which could be from few days, few weeks, few months, or even few years, and then toggling in between whatever comes your way. So good to see this as a view which is hopeful, which is looking at it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Yet this constant calibration and recalibration, I wonder if it brings a certain amount of anxiety or a fatigue, because you're never stable beyond a very short period of time.
Absolutely, yes, it does. These days more fatigue than anxiety, because every time I have to move, I have to change jobs. I have to put in some work, obviously, to get a new job, but also because I'm a designer, all my profession kind of hinges upon what I have made. So it's a very hands-on job. So I have to showcase that, what I've done. So every time I go for a new job, I have to update my showcase, and I have to show that. And every time there's like a presentation that I create, and then I talk about it. But again, the other side of that coin is that it's like an appraisal in a job, that I do it myself, which is I ask myself these questions: that what exactly did I do in last year? How did I progress? And then I try to answer them in that presentation and present it to my prospective employer, whoever it might be. And I try to get something new out of a job every time. It might be scale, it might be some creativity, it might be completely different product, it might be completely different market. I try to get something out of it. And then if that happens every year, every 5 years, or maybe a little more than that, I have to reinvent myself, because the creative profession is such an, inherently insecure profession in every sense. Although creativity is is a very common line between loads of professions, and it's never going to die. It's just that the tools of it and the niches of it are change every year, and then you have to kind of completely reinvent yourself in 4 or 5 years. If I had chosen an employer path, I would have never asked myself these questions, and I would have never been so hard on myself, scrutinize myself this much, because I think when the salary starts coming into your account every month, you kind of become hostage to it. You become a bit lazy, and you're like, okay, I mean, this is easy going. And in terms of anxiety, yes, 100%, it does bring in anxiety, but it's now Stockholm syndrome. I'm hostage to it. I don't have a choice. I love it. I kind of started enjoying the rush that I get out of it these days. And the third side to this is, I think, because I come from a family, so my father is a graphic designer. So in terms of the trade that I'm in, I'm okay at it. Like, I wouldn't say I'm great, but I know how it works. Like, it's the only thing I've seen since I was a child, and it's the only thing I've done since I was pretty much 16, 17, 18 years old when I started working in this. So that is an easy bit. And second is, also my father is also, he runs his own business. So and my mother, who used to work in a bank for a long time, and then she just gave all that up and started teaching music. So she also let her paycheck go. So I've seen that thing in my family. So it doesn't make me as anxious as someone who might come from a family background, a middle class, upper middle class Indian family background, who is both their parents are employees. So I'm a bit. It makes me a little less anxious than someone like that. So yeah,
I mean, as I was listening to you, as a symbol or as an image, what came to my mind was a ship on a voyage, which leaves shores and is on the seas for days, on weeks, or months. And after a while, it has to come back to the shore to refresh, to rejuvenate, rest for a while, only to get ready for the next voyage. That seems to be the image that comes to my mind as of now. But then, what in all this seems to have remained fairly stable for you is your love for biking.
Absolutely. I would say, I mean, cycling is my hobby. I mean, when I was a child, my parents wanted to have me a hobby. Like, back then, I was not interested. For them, I was not interested in anything, because same age kids around me were into something extracurricular. They were playing an instrument, they were playing a sport or something like that. I did none of those things. But there are two sides to it. One is, I think I made my hobby my profession. And second is, both my parents did exactly the same thing. Both of them made their hobbies their profession. So whenever I have seen them work, except for when my mother was working in a bank, now she teaches music, they have never displayed this energy of I'm working in that sense. They were always enjoying what they were doing. And I'm exactly the same. Like, because I made my hobby into my work, I never look at work as work. It's something I do because it's something I enjoy, and I'm really good at it because I've been doing it for a long, long time. And it's the only thing I know. I don't know anything else, right? So whenever someone interviews me and they say, why would you like to work in design? I've kind of flabbergasted at that sort of question, because to say that I don't know anything else is also limiting myself, right? You say that it's the only thing you know, right? It's kind of like makes you a one-dimensional human being, which is not nice. But sadly, and it is sadly, it's the only thing I know. So what happened in my 20s is that because of this, because it's the only thing I know, and I made my hobby my profession, I had a big hole in my life of another hobby. I needed another hobby. And I think that's when the cycling thing came in. And as I told you earlier, that I started cycling as a means of commuting, like it's going from A to B in London. and I enjoyed it. It gave me free exercise. I started losing weight. I was an obese child. I became really kind of lean at one point in London because I was cycling so much. And then from certain point, I was like, then I started kind of looking into like-minded people, like other people who cycle for hobby, and that's how I kind of got the bug. The moment I found a group of people to do these things with, then the whole world opened to me, because then in terms of like the variety of people within that niche was like so massive. Like there were like 60, 70-year-old men who used to ride 1,000 kilometers in one like crazy amount of cycling, and then there were like 20-year-old kids who used to ride bikes without any brakes in the city because it's thrilling. As a 20-year-old, it's really thrilling. You don't think about risks and anything like that, and London traffic is not that safe. That was kind of the spectrum, and everything that came in the middle. And I found this nice group of people. I didn't put too much effort into it. It was just pretty much going to the pub with a big group of cyclists, and like that, I kind of started getting more and more into it. The more I did it, the more I felt like this is something I really enjoy. And fundamentally, what I enjoy about it is the solitude. It's being able to be on my own out there in the elements and in the nature, and being able to think clearly. Like that has given me a lot of kind of boost almost professionally. And either way is when I cycle to work, I actually think about that day's work, and then I just go to work and execute it. So I basically do all my work on that 45 to 50-minute bike ride to work, and then I'm just sit in front of a computer and make it happen, because there are no
any long distance cycle trips that you've made which is close to your heart?
Absolutely, yeah. I started going to the French Alps or some sort of mountains every year since 2015, because I found this another group of friends who used to go there every year for this event that they did. So first year I was like, okay, I want to come as well, and they were a welcoming bunch of people, and I'm still in good. They're still good friends of mine today. One of them is actually a referee for my British citizenship application. They have been, so the French trips have always been going to the mountains, going up like crazy amounts of climbing. So for example, one of the climbs that we did on this year's trip into 2022 was called Col du Galibier. And that goes from a town called So every mountain the concept of a cycling over a mountain in France is they have basically constructed roads at the lowest point of that mountain at the top. So it's called the shoulder of a mountain, and that literally translates into Col. So Col du Galibier is basically shoulder of Galibier, the mountain. And the altitude gain in that was 2,600 and something meters. I don't know what that's in feet. And the overall like distance to go from not sea level, but about maybe 200 meters or 300 meters to 2,600 meters was about 30 kilometers. Mm-hmm. So on that sort of stuff, what you have to do is you're on your own basically for 3 or 4 hours. You're climbing up for 3 or 4 hours, and when you're going down on that same distance, it takes 15 minutes maximum. Like you take the same road up for 4 hours, and you go down the same road in 15 minutes. That does something to your head as well. It's endurance, I guess. It's at the base of any endurance sport, may it be running, cycling, or anything that's kind of like long distance. What it does to a human brain is what I find really kind of attractive, which is it gives you that crazy endorphin rush that you get out of doing something like that. And it puts you in this like pain situation where you kind of stop thinking about everything, and the world moves at a very beautiful pace, not a slow pace, not a fast pace. It's the exact pace of your physical ability. So so the way you think and the speed of the world around you matches in sync. If you do that, if I ever go on that mountain again on a motorcycle or inside in a car, I will never be able to experience it in the same way that I did it on the bicycle, because I was in sync with it at that time. Every mountain you can go up at least two ways. So the road that goes up on one side and then goes down on the other side. So for example, Col du Galibier I have done in 2015 or 16, I think, from the other side. And in 2022, I did it from the harder side, Valois. Is the name of a town. I did it from that side, so it just brings in a different dynamic. And I think I keep telling this to my friends, my cycling friends, that France is where I would really kind of like to retire and live, because if you ask someone if you're a beach person or a mountain person, my answer will always be I'm a mountain person. And if you're a mountain person, and especially if you're cycling or hiking, some sort of person like that, Alps are Disneyland. You're a child, and Alps are your Disneyland. There's like just crazy amount of stuff to do around there. And I can't swim, so I can't be a beach person.
So cycling obviously does give you phenomenal amount of physical fitness, the kind of cycling that you do. But if cycling has given you some, how should I say this? Gifts which are extremely precious to you, let's say, what gifts would they be?
Without a tiny amount of shadow in my doubt, it has nothing to do with cycling. It's the friends that I got through cycling. It's the people that I have surrounded myself who practice the same hobby. They may not practice it as the same level as me. They might be way better than me, or maybe not as good as me. But the people and friendships that I got because of that, I would have felt quite lonely in London without these friends.
So what sort of social profiles would they be, or age profiles would they be, briefly?
Oh, those friendships have brought me, and they still do, a lot of cultural understanding of UK as well, because I think apart from maybe one person who's Indian and also cyclist, everyone else is not from India. So they have taught me a lot about the UK culture. And sometimes, these days, because they're such good friends, I just literally blatantly ask them, like, what does this mean culturally, kind of a thing, and they explain it to me. There are still so many phenomena that I want to learn about the British culture that these people have taught me. One of my very good friends who used to work for like a political think tank, she worked in politics. She's a very good friend of mine, and we have done like long distance events together. So we once rode 600 kilometers together. And when you ride that kind of distance, so that's like 37 hours of cycling continuously, pretty much. You kind of run out of pleasant talk, like, hi, how are you, kind of a thing. Then you have to kind of dig deep about what to talk about, right? Sometimes you don't need to talk about anything, because the silences are very important between the sort of thing. Like the first 2 hours of a long ride like that, and the last 2 hours of a long ride like that, we never talk to each other, because we are in deep pain. So we used to talk about politics, as in not political leanings, but the mechanics of politics, because she has worked in politics for such a long time. She knows how politics work, like what exactly happens in House of Parliament, how is House of Parliament and House of Lords related, and why do MPs shout every time they do Prime Minister's question time, basic questions like that. If you look at any Prime Minister's question time, they bang their benches. And every time a question is finished, an MP stands up. Every little detail has the reason for it, and she has told me all of those, and it's so interesting.
Beautiful,
it's just so much fun. And the other side of the spectrum is that I have a friend who's like he works for a charity, and then he works for a charity who distributes food to older people, and what they do is they get surplus food from restaurants. So for example, like 5 kg of potato, 10 kg of potato that was going to go to waste from a restaurant, they get that, and there is a kitchen that they cook, and then they distribute that food to older people who don't have access to kind of that sort of stuff. And he does it on the bike. He does it on a big cargo bike. And I know him. Cycling is the thread that connects me to him. He has taught me a lot about how those sort of things work. And he's born and brought up in London. I know very few people who are actually born and brought up in London. He's like proper central London born and brought up person. So he teaches me a lot about London as well, which I still don't know a few things. So the spectrum is very wide.
Yeah.
All my like closest and really good friends are from cycling. 99% of my friends are because I know them because of cycling.
So here is something which you said very emphatically, because saying that design is the only thing that you know which gives you a professional life. Cycling is the other thing that you know, which apart from the joy of cycling has brought many, many amazing people in your life. And the third leg of the tripod seems to be your recent love for analog photography.
Yes.
When
Absolutely.
and how did that bug bit you?
I think what has happened is I have become a bit of a softie in terms of that I don't want to really cycle in winter anymore. The UK winters are quite harsh. The temperatures are really like cold, and sometimes there is ice on the road, and I just don't want to risk it anymore because I'm a father now. It's dark all the time. So I basically wanted I've realized something that I can't live without a hobby now. So I needed a winter hobby. And I was like, okay, what have I done in the past that kind of interests me, that I can do without having to be out in the elements, like not a sport or anything like that. And I didn't want to play a sport because you could play an indoor sport. I could learn swimming or go play tennis indoor somewhere or something like that. But I wanted to totally like completely different and contrasting to what my work is or what my other hobby is. So when I was a kid, my dad gave me a camera, maybe when I was like maybe 12, 13 years old, analog camera, film camera, which I used to use. I think these sort of stories you'll get every millennial talk about. And then I didn't take it seriously. I learned it a little bit in my fine arts college, a little bit. Again, I was not that interested about it. And then, I guess recently what has happened is a very good friend of mine from India, we went to fine arts school together. He got into it, he got back into it, and he kind of started talking. Well, we talk regularly, and he was like, "I've got into it. You should try it." And I trust him. Like he has a good sense of what kind of visual medium should be enjoyable. Like he knows exactly what needs to be done. So I trust him on that. And he said, yeah, you should try it. So I got myself like a really cheap camera to begin with, and I started taking photos, and I started enjoying it because after years and years of enjoying using like digital cameras or phones where you take a picture and you can see it, I couldn't see anything. And the first roll that I got, I was expecting it will be really, really bad, but it wasn't that bad. And I didn't have any subject or anything like that. I didn't have any theme. I was just using my camera in lunchtime whenever I used to go for a walk at work. And the first roll I got was quite good. So I was like, okay, maybe I should do this more and more and more. And these days now I have gone a bit, maybe deep into it. I now have like a darkroom setup at home where I develop my own film. And I want to get a bigger darkroom setup at home where I can print using negatives, using an enlarger, which is something I want to start doing. What interests me even within that as a subject is always taking pictures of people, but I'm really bad at it because I think what I've realized is that a good photographer is also a good conversationalist with someone you don't know, and I'm not that yet. People that I know, I have taken good photos of. So all my cycling friends, I've taken very good photos of. But people that I don't know, which again, if I ever get bored of design and want to kind of reinvent myself as someone who works in photography, I would have to be out of my comfort zone, which is exciting. And then maybe learn it, maybe go back to university, do a degree, and learn it again, be that student again, and get out of my comfort zone, talk to people, because that's what I kind of enjoy at the moment. And in terms of like media, I use a very I use a century-old camera technique. Basically, it's called a view camera, large format camera, where you kind of have to put a dark cloth on your head and you see the image turned around and you
Yes.
focus using the camera things. And the negative is basically 4x5 inches. It's a massive negative, almost like an A5 size. And then I develop it at home and then I scan it at home,
Beautiful.
so on and so forth. I enjoy the whole ritual of it. In fact, it's the ritual that attracted me to it rather than the outcome.
So, Amey, where does the designer, cyclist, and a budding analog photographer go from here?
Ooh. I'm good at assessing my past, but I'm not good at predicting my future. I don't know. I as I said, because of this perpetual crisis thinking, I don't live beyond 6 months.
Yeah.
Let's see. I mean, it's always the more I work in creative profession, the more I have started to realize that the fundamental thing about being in a creative profession is you have to be extremely self-critical of yourself. I have horrible imposter syndrome as well. Like I never showcase my photography work to anyone because I think it's shit. It's really, really bad. You have to be very hard on yourself, and you just have to love what you do, and then things happen to you. I have let go of having control over anything professional. As such, I am just going to let things happen to me because I know fundamentally I'm not doing anything wrong or anything. I know the formula, but I don't want to go beyond that. I want things to happen to me.
So well said. So well said. Amey, this has been such a wonderful and a beautiful conversation with someone who enjoys taking the day as it comes, taking the week as it comes, taking the month as it comes, and willing to accept what comes your way. As you beautifully said, let my future happen to me and I will be ready for whatever it is. So what a beautiful thought this has been, and this is a beautiful conversation. I've enjoyed every moment of it. How has this conversation been for you?
It's been excellent. It's been another one of those mini reviews that I do in my life. Tonight before sleeping, I will think about it. I will like, okay, I need to do this now.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for coming on the Wings podcast. Truly enjoyed having this conversation. Thank you so much. Good luck.
Thank you,
and take care.
Thank you for your time today, my dear listeners. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri, signing off. Goodbye, take care, and stay safe. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as a piece of any professional advice. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of its guest. Creators of this podcast expressly disclaim any and all liability or responsibility for any direct or indirect, consequential or other damages arising out of any individual's use of this podcast. For feedback and suggestions, please write to wingsindia75@gmail.com. Thank you.